All right, it looks like we are now recording. So good afternoon by 1 minute, everyone. I am Jonah Fogel. I'm the director of the Land Use Education Program, which is a partnership between Virginia Cooperative Extension and the Center for Public Administration and Policy. And of course, we offer lots of land use education programming for planning commissioners, BZA folks, as well as staff planners, professional planners out there in the great wide world, across Virginia anyway. This is part of our webinar Wednesday series. It's going to be every Wednesday in March. We'll have an hour-long lunchtime learning opportunity for anybody who wants to join us. Of course, you all have taken the time to register on our website and hopefully pass around that invitation to other folks. Today we're going to be talking to Ross Weaver. He's the Assistant Program Manager for Wetlands Watch, a nonprofit dealing with sea level rise and flooding and inundation issues along the coast of Virginia. Of course, we're also going to have webinars in the following weeks on some basics regarding planning, zoning, and also taking a look at how to adapt or change your zoning ordinance. So once you've gotten your comprehensive plan updated, then what? So we'll tackle those issues in the upcoming weeks. So hopefully you enjoy these, and all of these sessions are going to be recorded, and we'll make them available to you on YouTube. And of course, you can find the Land Use Education Program YouTube channel, where we have lots and lots of our past programming recorded and available for you all to watch. So we hope you take that invitation, subscribe to the channel, go to our website, planvirginia.com, and enjoy all those things that we've taken the time to produce for you. Today, like I said, we're going to have Ross give us a presentation on the Wetlands Watch Sea Level Rise Adaptation Guide. Ross took the time a few weeks ago to record a webinar giving a basic overview of the adaptation guide, and if you haven't found that yet, again, that's going to be hosted at the Plan Virginia YouTube site, and you can take a look at that, get your sort of your mind wrapped around the adaptation guide. You know, of course, go to the Wetlands Watch website and take a look at the guide itself and dig into that, because it's a very rich resource. They've taken a lot of time producing that document, that website, and are working actively with local governments along Virginia's coast to help amend some of the policies that are already on the books and make sure that sea level adaptation strategies are being implemented, and doing what we can with the tools that we have in Virginia to mitigate the flood risk, or at least adapt how we respond to flooding caused by sea level rise. For our format today, I'm going to say that we have about 20 minutes of a presentation from Ross, and then we'll have the rest of the remainder of the hour to hear from each other. We're going to hopefully have a discussion here. So if you have a chance to either turn on your microphone for your computer or call in to the number that's provided when you signed up for the meeting, you can interact with us, talk to Ross, and ask some questions, and hopefully we'll have a fairly rich discussion here that can both help you know, inform the adaptation guide, but also provide you some new information to help you work on the flooding issues. With that, I'm going to turn things over to Ross, let him introduce himself a little bit more thoroughly, and I think he's got some prepared remarks that he's going to lead us through. So without any questions coming through the chat box, I'm going to turn it over to Ross. If at any time during Ross's presentation you do have something that you'd like to ask later, feel free to type it in the chat box, and either Ross or myself will respond to it later. So Ross, I'm going to turn this over to you, providing you the host role. Enjoy the presentation. I'll be back with you in just a little bit, folks.
All right, thanks for that introduction, Jonah. So again, I'm Ross Weaver. I'm the Program Assistant Director for Wetlands Watch. Just a brief outline for today. At first I thought we could start with introductions, but I think there's a pretty large group. So just if you have any questions throughout the presentation, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and just name and title, so we kind of have an idea of the audience just before you have any questions or feedback. So in terms of my presentation, I'm just going to give a really brief overview of the project. Like Jonah said, there is a larger webinar that kind of goes into the process of the project, some of the takeaways, lessons learned, and so I don't want to repeat myself too much. But so I'm going to focus today, I'm going to use one chapter of the adaptation guide as an example. So I picked the comprehensive plan. So I'll just be covering different strategies for adding resiliency into the comp plan. And after that, I thought we could just kind of turn this into a sort of an informal conversation. I'd love to get your feedback, answer any questions. If there are any specific sections of the guide you'd like to cover, we can also do that. I'll have a link to the website where all this information is hosted, and we can cover any specifics that you like. So again, if you've seen the previous webinar, you've probably seen the slides, so I'll be quite brief. But in terms of an overview of the project, essentially what we wanted to do was research and document the different actions that localities are already taking to adapt to sea level rise. We also wanted to find out what the barriers to adaptation were, whether that be administrative time, funding constraints, issues with the regulatory environment. And then we wanted to take all that information, condense it into a guide that really focuses on what data local government staff most requested, and have that available to assist in adaptation efforts. So there's a link to the guide here. It's hosted online, which was some of the feedback we received was the best way to get this information out. So if you'd like to take a look at that while I'm speaking, feel free to do so. If there are specific sections you'd like to check out. We have 23 separate topics enclosed into the guide. Like I said, I'll be covering the comprehensive plan today, but it's a pretty wide range of activities, programs, plans, policies. Essentially, we want this document to be all-encompassing. Anytime there's an opportunity or space to increase resiliency measures within a tool that local government staff use, we'd like to cover it. So if you have any suggestions for actual topics that we haven't included, I'd love to hear those as well. I think in the future, some of the things I'd like to add to this, I'd like to create a section on the coastal primary sand dune guidelines. I think I'd also like to create a separate resource page on sort of financing tips for localities, using things like special service districts to fund adaptation. So within each of those topics, we have a number of different sections, and I'll go through all of these within the comprehensive plan. But just to give you a general idea, this is the information that we heard was sort of most requested. We heard there's a really big need to get funding opportunities, to learn about new tools, areas to find multiple benefits, things like CRS credits. So we try to include all of the most requested information in each one of these topics. So I'll get straight into the comprehensive plan. I should note, if you want more information, all of this information came from the resource pages that are on our website. But if you want to get more information or look at links that we've included for additional info, each one of these icons corresponds to where the information is located on the guide. This is part of our description section. Now we know that local government staff are aware of most of these policies and programs. We're not going to try to reinvent the wheel and describe a comprehensive plan. So we've focused on how these plans relate to sea level rise. That's been our major focus. So essentially for the comp plan, the two major ways to add resiliency measures are through assessing sea level rise vulnerabilities, whether that's through mapping, studying efforts, through the public participation process, and then also to recommend adaptive policies, which can then be legally implemented through the zoning ordinance, through the capital improvement program, et cetera. So I included this image. This just highlights the localities that are a member of the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission. I think it's interesting that Virginia actually codifies that the comprehensive plan for localities within the HRPDC must incorporate strategies to combat projected sea level rise. That's pretty unique nationally. Most states don't have an explicit demand to do that. So I wanted to call that out. Within the comp plan resource page, we've included two major case studies. The City of Virginia Beach's plan, which was just revised in 2016, and also the plan from Broward County, Florida. It gets cited a lot. It's one of the really innovative plans in terms of sea level rise adaptation. And so I'll get into some of the specifics of these case studies when I cover some of the implementation strategies. Each one of these guide sections, we try to include feedback that we received. When we started this process, we interviewed about 70 local government staff, different planners, community managers, hazard mitigation people, city attorneys. So we try to get a large, diverse group of stakeholders. And during those interviews, we got a lot of really interesting anecdotal advice, different comments. And in some cases, we learned sort of specifics, for specific acquisition programs, issues that were arising with funding or regulatory constraints. There wasn't so much of that anecdotal feedback for the comp plan. So for this section, we've just included some of the common refrains we heard quite often. One of those being that the lack of standard sea level rise projections is a real barrier to adaptation. It's wildly expensive to plan for large different scenarios in sea level rise planning. But I think that the 2016 comp plan update in Virginia Beach does a pretty good job of addressing this. They use a short and a long-term projection. And that long-term projection is 3 feet, and that's what the city expects to see. It's about a 50-plus year window planning horizon. And that long-term projection is used as the basis for decisions on designing and replacing public infrastructure, for alternative transportation, for stormwater systems. So it's a pretty good way of handling that barrier. We also heard quite often there is a need for localized goals and strategies. So in the implementation section, I will try to cover how some Virginia localities are addressing creating specific plans within their own boundaries. So we include a benefits and a drawbacks section for the guide, or for each guide section. We want to kind of quickly highlight some of the pros and cons. There are some pretty obvious benefits to incorporating sea level rise planning into the comprehensive plan. One being that it's just a really cost-efficient way of planning. Certainly, it makes a lot more sense from a fiscal standpoint to site infrastructure and new developments in areas that are at a higher elevation or that are just in general less vulnerable to sea level rise. That's much more cost-efficient than going back and undergoing really expensive renovation projects or infrastructure elevation, which can be really expensive. We also find one of the big benefits to comp planning for sea level rise is that it's a great opportunity for public engagement. And so obviously, public participation is part of comprehensive planning. But beyond the fact that it's just a required component, we find that this is a really good way to get the public involved and to kind of gain some public support. One of the things we hear quite often is that there's a need for local flood data to find out within a community which areas are flooding, which areas are really struggling with inundation. So we find that really engaging the public early, having community mapping sessions where, just a public meeting where the community members can go in and put pins on a map where they know of flooding, that kind of information can be really important. And I think going off of that, when you then begin to address or implement specific policies to address these specific areas that are suffering, I think it helps create public support. That is sort of an issue. During this process, I've reviewed a tremendous number of comprehensive plans, and I find that sometimes they can be a bit overly ambitious. Plans can be designed without taking into account the administrative time needed to implement a new program, or who's going to be in charge of orchestrating some of these new programs. So taking that in mind, I think it's really important to kind of focus on low-hanging fruit, focus on public engagement, and then use that kind of good public support to push forward the implementation process. So moving into the implementation, I've tried to structure this so it kind of goes in a linear format. So if you're undergoing a comp plan renovation or a revision, this would be a pretty decent order to start on. So one of the first things I would recommend doing is to increase the planning horizon. So the conventional comprehensive plan plans for about a 20-year horizon. That's not really an adequate amount of time when you're considering sea level rise, especially as rises kind of begin to increase. So in the Virginia Beach comp plan, like I mentioned, they have that 3-foot projection that's over a 50-year horizon. And not to be outdone, Norfolk has undergone what they're calling the Vision 2100 process. And this is in addition to the comprehensive plan. It's sort of identifying that the comp plan, which has a 20-year horizon, isn't really a sufficient look out into the future. And so this is a visioning document that looks about 100 years into the future. We had a great public engagement process. The city highlighted different areas of the city that are going to have different effects of sea level rise and started introducing strategies for those specific areas. So once that planning horizon is increased, I think the next big step is to study and map vulnerabilities. I use the Broward County example because I think it is probably one of the best in the country. Broward County has created a priority planning area map and priority planning area for sea level rise, I should say. And so this map shows areas that are at risk for inundation with a 2-foot rise in the sea level, and that's projected to occur in the area by about 2060. So as you can see to the right, these areas are highlighted in magenta, and this is part of the land use map. It's part of the plan, so it's pretty official. One of the really interesting things that Broward County and the state of Florida as a whole are doing is kind of creating what's known as adaptation action areas. This is really cool. I'll get to that. So essentially, this is something that was created through the state of Florida, and these adaptation action areas are zones that have a higher risk of sea level rise. And after identifying and designating these zones, they can be used to prioritize funding and also to create specific adaptation strategies. So you can see on this second map, in 2015, Broward adopted their first action area. It's the sort of the yellow area over here. So that's a really good example of a national case study showing some interesting ways of incorporating this into the comp plan. But even though that's not a tool available to Virginian localities, there are plenty of ways that we can develop localized mitigation strategies. I think James City County has a really good example. They've included 4 individual watershed management plans within their comprehensive plan. It's referenced in the plan, adopted in the plan. It's been adopted by their board. And these watershed management plans have individualized strategies, different goals and actions. Just as an example, there's one for the Powhatan Creek watershed, and that watershed management plan has specific actions. It features localized conditions. In that case, they use a 200-foot minimum riparian buffer along the main tidal stem, which can really help to preserve ecological value. There's a lot of ways to sort of develop these localized mitigation strategies. I also think it's probably an important consideration. It's really valuable to design strategies for areas that are most susceptible to sea level rise, but at the same time, you should also consider strategies for areas that aren't quite as susceptible. It really needs to be more of a holistic plan. So some strategies, for example, for an area that's really highly vulnerable, that's having a lot of flooding, strategies like targeting areas for open space preservation. That would be things like conservation easements, transfer or purchase of development rights, adding more stringent requirements for rebuilding, redevelopment, new development, and also promoting resilient shoreline management strategies, things like living shorelines. After developing those specific strategies, I think it's really important also to make sure that the comp plan is aligned with other plans and ordinances. I think it's certainly true that a lot of local government staff face change fatigue. It's really hard to create new actions and implement new programs when the regulatory environment is changing. And by the same token, I think it's very confusing when watershed management plans, the zoning ordinance, or floodplain management plans, if they don't all have the same goals and actions as the comp plan, it can be really difficult in the implementation process. So that's why it's important to start with the comp plan and kind of move from there.
Yeah, that's working. You say, okay.
And then finally, just a few ways to. Kent, does someone have a question? I feel like I hear a little feedback. Might just be someone calling in.
Hey, Ross, if somebody's calling in on the phone, I think if you right-click on the call-in user 3, it gives you a chance to mute that line.
Okay. Yeah, I see that. And then finally, one last thing in terms of implementation, we try to look at some ways to increase accountability. You want this document to really inform strategies and actions and really lead to real results. So it's important to include benchmarks for success, an implementation schedule, and also an implementation progress report, something that could be included as part of a planning commission's annual report. Again, just to ensure that actions are being undertaken. I use this example from Virginia Beach. This is part of their comp plan, their agenda for future action. I think it's a really good example because it shows a specific recommended action, a targeted study area, in this case, the Princess Anne Commons and interfacility traffic area. It shows lead responsible parties and also a time frame for completion. And so I do think these strategies can really help increase the successful implementation, increase accountability. So after our implementation section, we go straight into CRS credit. Just in case not everyone is aware of what the CRS is, it's the Community Rating System, and that is a program. It's part of the National Flood Insurance Program, and essentially it incentivizes localities to take additional flood-proofing steps. And the benefit of that is that it's a point system, and the more points you receive, you get a class within the CRS, and the lower the class you have, you get discounts for homeowners insurance premiums. So we really wanted to focus on actions that could easily generate CRS credit. We're really focused on multiple benefits and trying to focus on actions that can help achieve a lot of different aims, whether that be CRS points, helping with a WIP or MS4 program, also helping different departments, Parks and Rec, stormwater management, hazard mitigation. There's a lot of space for collaboration, so we try to focus on that. So in this case, there are a couple of really easy things you can do to gain CRS points within the comprehensive plan. That would be, there's credit up to 100 points available for addressing habitat conservation and restoration, green infrastructure, natural floodplain functions. And up to 10 points are also available for plans that recommend open space or low density within flood-prone areas. Just as a little plug, our policy director is a real expert on the CRS, and we've developed a more comprehensive guide to the community rating system that's available on our website, should you have any extra questions. Again, online we have much more. We have a number of pieces of code and more tools, but I didn't want to be too wordy for this presentation. We wanted to really try to cover all of the enabling legislation we could. It's probably not as important for the comprehensive plan since it's so well established, but for new acquisition programs, for TDR, purchase of development rights programs, I think localities are hesitant to undergo new programs unless they have explicit legislative authority. So we always try to be mindful of that and include those wherever possible. And then for the tool section, we've just included resources that localities have told us have been useful. And so that's things, it includes the comprehensive coastal resource management portals that VIMS works on. It includes work groups, for example, the Hampton Roads PDC and the Accomack Northampton PDC both have different work groups available where planners and local staff can get together and discuss planning efforts, discuss sort of new innovations as they come around. And then finally, we also include software. So we have a number of different programs that can be useful for these different adaptation actions. This is an example. This is the SLAM View 2.0, which is a good tool for estimating sea level rise projections. It can also be quite valuable showing changes in land use, estimating things. But we include a number of programs for the comprehensive plan. We've included a NOAA tool called CanViz, which is pretty useful. It's a visualization tool, sort of like a light version of Photoshop. So it's good for staff members who might not have experience with Adobe Creative Suites, but would like to create kind of simple visuals to help with planning programs and efforts. So we link out to all of those. And one of the benefits of doing this online is that everything is hyperlinked. So if you need more information or you want to check this out directly, we link to the schedules for these work groups. We link to where to download these programs. And then finally, each resource page, we just list out the resources that helped inform our product and resources where you can go and find additional information, find any number of things. So that is essentially just one idea of one example of the guide. Like I said, there are 23 of these different topics, so it'd be a lot to cover for one webinar. I thought comprehensive planning could sort of be relevant to everyone and a little bit interesting. But now, I thought we could just sort of open it up and see if there are any questions, if anyone had any feedback. There's lots of things I'd love to cover. I'd be curious to see how you felt about the format of the guide, the content, if you think there are additional sections we need to cover, if you think that having a presentation like this is valuable. One of the things I've thought about doing is going back and kind of making a presentation for each of these sections and sharing them within the resource page. So if people wanted to just kind of a brief YouTube video that describes some of this stuff in more in depth, I've considered doing that. So if you think that might be useful, just generally things like that, I would love to hear about it.
Well, thank you, Ross. That was very constructive to hear all the different pieces of how you guys have considered the comprehensive planning process within Sea Level Rise. I'm going to just kind of see what kinds of questions or dialogue you guys want to have. If you have a microphone on your computer, you're welcome to join the call that way. If you'd prefer to join the audio section by calling in and using your phone, I'm going to post the toll-free number, and again, the meeting code in the chat box. So if you want to join and have a discussion that way, the audio is just going to go right through the computer when you call in, but at least that way you'll be able to use your phone and you don't have to worry about whether or not your microphone on your computer works or not. So feel free to join in that way. Does anybody have, and you're also welcome to type in the chat box if there are things that you'd like to provide some feedback to Ross, or if you have some questions about what he's been saying so far. I did watch the video. I thought that there was a lot of material there. I certainly think that the more you can digest some of the complexity of these things, Ross, I think helps people find the piece they need when they need it, rather than trying to dive through the entire document. Those kinds of things can be overwhelming. There's a lot there and a lot of action going on at the local level. So every time I hear somebody like yourself talk, I always think to myself how in the weeds you have to be, for lack of a better term, to really see where there's opportunity and how to capitalize on those opportunities. For you guys, when you were looking at the research and developing the guide, did you find that there was a lot of overlap between jurisdictions and the types of things that they tended to focus on? Or in your investigation, like adding the discussion about the CRS credits, was that something that they were looking for and they just hadn't had the opportunity to understand that yet? So how did that work?
Well, I think that there are certain things, and this goes back again to those interviews we started with. There are certain things that sort of everyone was interested in, and one of those was the CRS credit. And then moving forward, another thing we heard quite often was a need to try to piece together more of the stormwater management side of this into everything. So I think for moving forward, one of the things I'm going to be focusing on is doing some more research about incorporating stormwater management practices into the guide, but also finding ways of finding ways of achieving those multiple benefits, focusing on programs that can deal with MS4 stormwater management, that have the benefit of creating a more resilient community, and then also ideally would also benefit the creation of community parks and things like that. In terms of adaptation strategies that different localities are using. There is some overlap, but I think it kind of depends based on geography, on elevation, land use, county or city composition. Cities tend to have the same types of programs, and then there are certain programs that are really only available to a certain type of locality that might have more open space already. And it's really difficult to have a successful conservation easement program or a transfer of development rights program if there's not a lot of open land left to do that. So then we have tried to explore ways of getting around those barriers. I know in New York State, for example, they allow for the transfer of development rights between two different localities. I think that's a really cool partnership, a good way for a more built-out city and a more rural locality to kind of help each other and achieve some open space goals.
And you're saying that those sort of transfer development rights programs don't allow for that here in Virginia, or we just haven't had that example yet?
Yeah, I've never seen an example of two localities within the state cooperating on one TDR program. Unless anyone knows of one, I would certainly love to learn more about it. I don't think there's any laws. I don't think there's any reason you couldn't do it. But New York has gone ahead and codified it and has sort of pushed out that type of collaboration.
Gotcha. And for the sake of discussion, can you go into a little bit more depth on the CRS credits? Because I'm not as familiar with that as I probably should be. But it sounds like that the locality can be doing things that actually support discounts for homeowner insurance. This is not something that homeowners would be doing in support of the comprehensive plan that they themselves would benefit from.
Right. Yeah. These are actions that would be taken at the local government level, but they benefit homeowners. So it's a nice way of kind of increasing public support for some of these actions. And there are all kinds of different things that you can use that can be credited for the CRS. The largest benefits, the largest points come from open space preservation, especially in the floodplain. And so, yeah, it's actions that the local government would take, but as a result, you can get a pretty significant discount on your insurance premiums. I think there are a few states or a few localities in Virginia that have about a 20% decrease in their homeowners flood insurance premiums, which can be really significant. So there's a lot of interest in that program, and I think it's kind of increasing as we continue to go out and talk to localities. It seems like it's something that people are already either enrolled in and are interested in getting more points, or they're really interested in kind of starting the enrollment process. It is pretty unwieldy is the wrong word. It takes a bit of administrative time to run one of these programs, okay. But you know, our policy director does a lot of work going into localities and sort of advising the easiest ways they can get enrolled and highlighting the most effective, most efficient ways of getting a lot of points within the system.
Does anybody else on the call have any experience with the CRS program or with some of the ideas that Ross has been sharing so far in his presentation? I'd just be curious to know how other folks are responding to Sea Level Rise currently, or if some of this stuff is new for you. Can everybody hear me? I just want to make sure we're able to communicate back and forth.
Yeah. I'm going to make sure I'm on mute. I don't think that I do.
Yeah, I think everybody should be unmuted at this point. All right, so the other thing that I was hearing, Ross, was there seems to be maybe another reason to do some of the things that are currently on the books. I heard you talk about TDRs and PDRs, but also buffering, open space protections, those kinds of programs. Those are things that people are fairly familiar with. Is this simply an expansion of the existing tools, basically finding new, or maybe not even new, but overlapping goals between existing comp plan objectives and sea level rise? How important have the scenario projections been to looking at those overlaps between open space goals that are already on the books and new objectives for open space.
There definitely is a lot of overlap. I think that when you kind of increase the planning horizon and look at those sea level rise projections, kind of how Broward County has put those into the land use map. When you visualize what areas are really going to be struggling with inundation, it can help inform some of the existing programs. So it's easier to, when you do that, it's easier to target areas where space should really be prioritized, where open space should be prioritized, areas where, and then at the same time, areas that have a lot of economic development that are really going to be struggling with inundation. Just visualizing those, finding those areas helps to inform existing strategies. I think certainly there are some localities that are taking that information and focusing conservation easements in more vulnerable areas, and then by the same token, along with shaping development into higher elevation and things of that nature. So I do think it's a great deal of overlap and sort of informing existing programs to make sure they're running as efficiently as possible and conserving the most valuable land.
Okay. One more reason to do good planning.
Absolutely. It's where it all begins.
Yeah. Has most of the action happened within the Hampton Roads PDC, or are you finding that even outside of that, people are starting to take action?
I think there's really a lot of innovative actions going throughout the coast, really throughout the state of Virginia entirely. There are some places that are really taking a leadership role. There are some great things coming out of the HRPDC and the localities within the HRPDC. But at the same time, the Middle Peninsula Planning Commission is doing some really innovative things. On the previous webinar, I mentioned the Middle Peninsula Public Land Authority. That essentially, if you haven't seen that first presentation, essentially it's an authority that takes donated lands where property owners are having trouble selling their property because of inundation problems, flooding problems. And so they're taking these donated lands and then using them for a number of really cool multiple benefits. They're renting the properties out they receive for Boy Scout troops, Girl Scout troops. They're conducting some pilot programs on some of these donated parcels, and also using them as a match for grant funding. And again, those are the kinds of things we're trying to highlight. Taking a program and using it for as many benefits as possible. It just makes all of this stuff so much easier to implement.
Yeah. And do you know, are folks tracking, the progress against their objectives so they can, I guess the larger question here is, are these adaptation strategies adding up to enough of a response to save either land or buffer, inhabited areas from the worst of sea level rise expectations, or are there additional steps that aren't going to be included in this adaptation guide that really need to be thought of at a larger scale? I guess the reason I'm asking that is because you guys have worked from this local governmental level and sort of done the research within that context, but then there's things that, like Norfolk was thinking more broadly about, okay, where does our footprint need to recede to, and then how do we work from that perspective? Whereas the adaptation guide seems more focused on taking things and kind of incrementally improving where possible. Just a little bit of a different approach, I guess.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that it's sort of the things we've touched on at this point are the things that we find that the local governments are already doing. So we do want to cover that. It's tough because some of the more innovative adaptation actions really require some state support, and it's not always the easiest thing to get. Kind of going back to that example in Florida, the creation of those adaptation action areas, although it's still a very new program and there's only one to this point, it just makes a lot of sense, and it really makes localized adaptation planning much easier. But that requires, that's part of the state code, and it requires some state support. So we try to focus on things that that local government staff can already do. We know that most of the coastal development issues, especially for this kind of work we do, they tend to be decided at the local government level in terms of controlling land use, and coastal development. So that's where we've spent our time, finding that to be the most effective use of our time. But yeah, it sort of depends. It really, without the state taking a more of a leadership role, there are certain things that just aren't quite feasible at this time.
Mm-hmm. But what's being done now certainly would fit into that larger context. So the steps now that are being taken are not outside or somehow not constructive and not developing into a larger framework eventually. So that's useful to understand. I've been going back and forth with Ross here for a little while. Does anybody else have any questions, or do you need a clarification anywhere in what we've been talking about? What was interesting to you guys about what's been discussed? So clearly you've decided to join the webinar for some reason. Hopefully there's something in here that has piqued your interest or remains a question for you. So please either step into the chat box or give us a call on the chat line, as they say. We're happy to hear from you. Is there other stuff that's going on with Wetlands Watch that you want us to know about, Ross?
Well, I did touch on a lot of the kind of other adaptation efforts we're undergoing in the first presentation, but we're making some pretty good progress with those projects. If anyone's interested, I guess everything we do is sort of based off of kind of gaps we find at the local government level, where there are just things that are needed that haven't been done quite yet. So the Sea Level Rise phone app that we have, for those of you who aren't aware of it, it's a process, or it's an app that allows for the crowdsourcing of flood information. So it's a free app on iTunes or Google Play, and it allows you to go out during a flood event and just kind of chart where flooding is happening in your neighborhood. And then that data gets crowdsourced, and it can be used for a bunch of different people: emergency managers, mappers, modelers. And so we just try to address, and there's a big need for localized flood data, and so that's one way we try to address it. By the same token, for sea level rise adaptation and for just floodplain management, stormwater management, we're really interested in grid infrastructure, obviously, and the use of nature-based stormwater solutions. And we find that one of the big barriers to successful grid infrastructure is that in this area there just aren't enough contractors who have expertise in not only the design and installation of green infrastructure, but in the maintenance. And it's just so inefficient to spend a lot of money to develop a really nice, low impact development green infrastructure project, and then not properly maintain it, and it loses all its effectiveness, and it's just wasted money. So we try to address that gap by working with, helping to create the Chesapeake Bay Landscape Certification, which is a credentialing system for
service providers, who give them a little bit more of an incentive to stay up with those BMPs and keep on top of them. Yeah, that's certainly an issue. I think the ongoing upkeep and maintenance of those BMPs especially are critically important for being able to make sure we have effectiveness wherever you put a BMP. So they've got to be effective over the lifetime of the installation. So they can't just be set and forget, as they say.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you for all the good work you guys are doing at Wetlands Watch, and hopefully the adaptation guide gets lots of hits, and you can report back to us as to whether or not you find that some tools are finding more favor than others, and why that might be. I certainly want to know personally more about the CRS credit system and how that's been influencing the planning practice at the local level, above and beyond what people have already implemented. So I'll be touching base with you guys again soon to see if and how we need to respond educationally a little bit more. If there's something that the land use education program can do to support that, I'd be very interested to understand that. So Ross, without any more questions here that in the chat box or otherwise, I very much appreciate you providing this webinar today, and certainly the pre-recorded video that you guys already made for us. We're going to make sure that material finds its way onto our website, and if there's anything we can do to help promote that, please let us know. We'd be happy to make sure that gets into the hands of the people who can use it. So I really appreciate you spending your lunchtime with us, and hopefully the folks on the webinar today were able to get some good information from you. And Your information is also available on the Wetlands Watch website, and they can get in touch with you directly in that way.
Absolutely, yeah. I would, if anyone decides they have some feedback or just wants to email me privately or message me, I sure do love hearing feedback. And one of the benefits of this online is that we want it to act sort of as an adaptation wiki. So we always want to update it. We always want to find new strategies, new things that we can cover. So that'd be great. And thank you, Jenna. Thanks for letting me speak. And thanks to everyone who spent their lunch break with me. I know it's valuable time, so I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Ross. We'll talk to you again soon.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time for our next webinar.
Sounds great.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Stop sharing this.